So this is the Analogue Solutions Treadstone Eurorack module. This is a full synthesizer voice with an effects circuit, a little kind of digital delay circuit. We've also got a kind of phrase sequencer, or like a loop sequencer they call it, which is kind of like an SH101 style kind of step sequencer. So we can take our MIDI notes in, put a clock in, and then we can generate a 16-step pattern. So we've got a single oscillator, which can be either a sawtooth or a square. We've then got pulse width modulation, which can be either based on the envelope or based on the LFO. So we've got a single LFO to control pulse width. The LFO also can re-trigger the envelope. So if we just, so you can see now I'm re-triggering the envelope. Now we're kind of almost in audio rate. You can hear that's the shortest that the envelope goes. So anyway, let's just have a listen to the oscillator and then we'll go through everything else. So first of all, here is the oscillator. So this is the sawtooth. On the oscillator section, which is this little section here, we've also got, we can blend from a sawtooth through to the square. We can then do pulse width modulation. You can hear it goes quite wide, always up all the way through 0. As well as this kind of sawtooth to square, we can also add in a square subwave. So I've got a blend of sawtooth and square with some pulse width modulation and then the sub underneath. So there's quite a lot of bottom end on that, even without the sub in. We can also flip this switch to add some noise, so you can hear that there. Next we can move on to the filter. So this is a 24 dB low pass filter with resonance. We've also got 2 modulation kind of routings or set routings. So basically that is either envelope control of filter cutoff or velocity control of filter cutoff. So if we just drone it again, then we'll start to listen to the filter. So that's with no resonance. It goes very low, obviously that's like kind of past the human hearing. Now if you listen, if we're all the way up, you do get, as it's a 24 dB, we do get a little bit of kind of reduction in the low end once we start to introduce some of the resonance. You can hear that there. So if we just go to about there, and then start to hear it. I'm going to increase the resonance, then go back up. And we're just listening to the one wave. We can add in the sub. You can hear it starts to clip there slightly. So it is quite a aggressive sounding filter because we're kind of like overloading it on the input. Well, that's what it sounds like to my ears at least. Add some noise in. Here it starts to break up quite a bit. If we reduce the resonance, obviously we don't get that as much. Resonance goes all the way into self-resonating. Putting in sub oscillator now. So that is kind of the filter section. So if I start to, let's have a listen to this envelope. So I've added a little bit of envelope control of the filter here. So that's as snappy as it goes. I'd say the attack is not quite as snappy as something like my Quadro over here. Add in some envelope modulation of pulse width. Very kind of classic sounding. We've also at the moment got the velocity all the way up to control the filter. So if I touch lighter on my MIDI keyboard here, I'll take out the so you can hear I'm right down, I'm really kind of not hardly pressing at all. If I hit it a little bit harder, obviously we get more kind of opening of the filter. Then we've got the this kind of reflect circuit. So this is the VCA that's completely dry at the moment. But if we start to increase that, you can start to hear some of this kind of reflect, or kind of very short delay basically. We've got the subwave in. So I would say that this kind of delay circuit or something is not the most, it's not the nicest sounding thing, but it's kind of lo-fi, it's kind of aggressive. If we get it really tight, we can add the decay or the feedback all the way up. You can hear it starts to break up there, kind of very kind of gnarly sounding. With this LFO, we can also use it to loop the envelope. So yeah, so that is kind of the basic features. Let's just run through some patches and we can see what we've got. So let's just have a look at this patch bay along the bottom here. We've got two CV inputs for the pitch of the oscillator. The top one has got this attenuator, so that we can attenuate the incoming voltage. We've got a full range kind of input on the bottom here. So this is kind of the VCO kind of patch points. We've then got a pulse width modulation input, so duty. We can change the duty cycle with an external CV source, and then we've got the square wave output, so that's kind of useful for certain things. Then moving along, we've got two outputs for the LFO. So although we don't have pre-routed LFO modulation of, say, the filter, we could still do that with these outputs. So we've got the triangle output and the square wave output. We've then got an audio input, so that just goes into the VCF and through the reflect circuit or the delay. We've then got two CV inputs for the VCF, so we've got a attenuated one just like we have on the pitch input here, and then we've got an unattenuated CV input as well. Then we've got the envelope kind of output, so or input and output. So we can trigger the envelope externally, and then we get the envelope output as well. So let's just start by sticking a clock into the sequencer. So I've got a little sequence that I've kind of pre-recorded in here. So you can hear that there. We're just listening to the sawtooth at the moment. So if we add in some of the sub, maybe mix in some of the mix between the saw and the square wave with some envelope modulation of the pulse width. So I've also got this external LFO here, or it's an envelope but I'm looping it, so it's an LFO. I'm going to go into pitch, and you can start to hear some of the FM kind of tones that we can get out of this by if we really increase this. So if I open the filter completely, you start to hear some of that FM. Hear that velocity which I recorded into the sequencer affecting the cutoff as well. So now we could take, say, this LFO output, so we'll take the triangle and we'll go into the filter as well. So then we've got basically three modulations working on the filter. FM now. Got the subwave in. So now let's take the envelope output. We're going to go into the pitch, but we're just going to do this very, very slightly. I do find with these attenuators it's quite hard to, it's kind of, the range is very slight, and that's obviously just because we're on these tiny little pots here. So yeah, that is kind of a bit of the patch bay. We looked at sequencing there for a second. So yeah, let's just listen to a few more patches. So the Analogue Solutions Treadstone Eurorack module. First of all, let's talk about the price. It is £359 UK, which isn't a bad price at all when you consider that you get basically a MIDI to CV interface and a full voice with effects and the patch points, sequencer, that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's some stiff competition in this kind of price range, but generally it's pretty good. You do get quite a lot for your money. Couple of things that I didn't like about it. I didn't really like the way that the filter sounded when it was clipping, and I found it quite hard to make it not clip, especially when you have the subwave on. That the clipping kind of only really happens around the lower ranges of the filter. So if you can avoid the lower ranges of the filter, you can avoid the clipping. But yeah, generally, I mean, it's a kind of vintagey sounding retro voice, so some of that kind of clipping kind of or that kind of like distortion kind of clipping might be preferable if you're going for that sort of sound. Overall, build quality is very good. All the switches feel solid. These knobs up here feel very solid indeed. Obviously with these little pots, you can't dial in as much control as you would on a kind of on a bigger pot, but they feel pretty solid, and I think for this price you are getting a lot of control, and so having all of these mini pots obviously gives you that price for a small manufacturer like Analogue Solutions. So yeah, overall not a bad synth with a good feature set, just a couple of things, and I think it would have been a real winner for me.